Bug-Eyed Tales presents Besieged in a Tree, an officer's adventure with a rogue elephant by C.E. Gouldsbury, then the district superintendent of the Bengal Police.
This story is an account of a terrible adventure which happened to a friend of mine, Lieutenant, now Captain, R. MacLeod Porteus of the Indian Staff Corps. His regiment was quartered in the district to which I was attached at the time, and as he related his experiences to me a few days after the occurrence, all the facts were still fresh in his mind and made a lasting impression on mine. The regiment's wing, to which my friend Porteus belonged, the 9th Bengal Infantry, was stationed on a hill about 2,000 feet above the plains. These plains were covered in vast, nearly impenetrable jungles, crisscrossed by swift mountain streams and home to herds of wild elephants. Rhinoceroses, tigers, and leopards were plentiful, while pig and deer were so abundant and easy to hunt that the tigers and leopards had enough food without needing to prey on the cattle of the scattered villages along the military road through the forest. Traditional hunting methods, such as staking out the carcass of a cow or bullock killed by predators, or beating the jungle where the carcass was dragged, were not feasible. Instead, the best strategy was to occasionally tie up an old bullock or cow at night along a path known to be frequented by tigers. If a kill occurred, a platform was quickly built in the branches of a nearby tree, where the sportsman would take position at sundown, hoping the tiger would return to finish its meal. This method was often used, particularly by my young friend, a keen and fearless sportsman who paid little mind to the risks of fever or the discomfort and danger of these all-night vigils. Porteus had followed these tactics for several weeks, but had not been successful so far. Either the live baits broke loose and wandered back home, or they were killed during the dark phases of the moon. He kept watch over some of these kills and fired shots in the direction where he could hear the tiger feeding. But he could never tell if he hit or missed. In any case, the morning light only ever revealed the remains of the unfortunate kill, with no sign of the tiger. However, perseverance seemed about to pay off. One bright afternoon, the shikari, an experienced local hunter and tracker, reported that a bullock, tied in the bed of a dry river deep in the forest, had been killed, likely by a large tiger. The carcass had been dragged a considerable distance into a relatively open area of jungle, near a tree that was perfect for building a platform with a clear view of the carcass. The shikari mentioned that he had already built the mashan, or platform, and suggested that, since evening was approaching, the sahib should set out immediately. Porteus, eager to act, wasted no time. Since the location was about 5 miles away and it would be late by the time he arrived, he got permission from his commanding officer to take one of the regimental elephants, a reliable old female. With his 5.77 express rifle and a couple of rugs, along with the shikari seated behind him, he was soon on his way. When he arrived at the kill, it was getting dark, but there was still enough light for him to climb into the tree, which he did with the help of the shikari, using the elephant's back as a boost. As he climbed, he noticed that the tree was somewhat slender. However, once on the platform, he found it stable enough and high enough to be safe from any potential attack by the tiger. Feeling secure, he dismissed the shikari and the elephant, instructing them to stay the night in a village about 2 miles away and return for him in the morning. He then settled in as comfortably as possible on his high perch, eagerly waiting for the moon to rise. He worried that, despite the disturbance caused by his arrival, the tiger might appear while it was still dark. But it seemed that Stripes, a nickname for the tiger, referring to its distinctive striped coat, had no such plans, as 2 or 3 long hours passed without any sign of it. The moon was now shining brightly, casting a light as clear as day across the landscape. Porteus observed that although there was dense jungle stretching for miles around, the area immediately to his right had lighter cover, thinning out to low scrub near the riverbed, which was clearly visible about 100 yards away. Having completed his survey, he was starting to feel the time drag when he thought he heard the soft, muffled tread and low, purring sound that any seasoned sportsman would recognize. The cautious approach of a tiger sensing danger. The sounds grew louder and closer, and Porteus braced himself, expecting the tiger to appear at any moment. Just then, a new noise interrupted the night. Coming from a distance but rapidly approaching, the sound of several large bodies crashing through the jungle on the opposite bank of the riverbed. It was accompanied by loud squeals and trumpeting, as if a herd of elephants had gathered. Suddenly, a massive male elephant with enormous tusks burst into view, charging down the riverbed at full speed before disappearing from sight. He was immediately followed by a large herd of about 20 elephants, clearly in pursuit and in a state of furious rage. They were squealing and trumpeting wildly as they raced after the fugitive, determined to catch him. Any hope of encountering the tiger was now gone. Although tigers are usually not intimidated by wild elephants, the kind of commotion he had just witnessed would have scared off any wild animal. Porteus was naturally fascinated by the rare sight of an unruly tusker being driven out of a herd, something few sportsmen ever get to witness. Yet he couldn't help but feel disappointed that this show had not only cost him his chance at the tiger, but also left him facing a long, pointless vigil for the rest of the night. Little did he know, an even more thrilling experience was about to unfold. The herd of pursuing elephants had now disappeared from view, though their distant sounds could still be faintly heard. Realizing he was in for a long night, Porteus began to make himself as comfortable as possible, given the situation. He secured his rifle to the platform and lay down, hoping for sleep, but kept awake by a faint hope that the tiger might still return. Just as he was drifting off, the noise of the herd returning jolted him awake. He soon saw them, moving in single file, quietly making their way up the riverbed and back into the jungle from where they had originally come. In no time, they were out of sight and hearing once again. From the elephants' now calm and peaceful behavior, it was clear that the rogue had been effectively driven off. At least, that was the conclusion the young sportsman reached. With the excitement seemingly over, he lit his pipe for a final smoke before settling back down on his rugs. However, he had barely begun when he heard the sound of another elephant moving through the jungle where the rogue had been chased. Suddenly, a large tusker emerged, slowly walking up the riverbed. As the elephant came in line with Porteus' tree, it halted, raising its trunk in the air as if trying to catch a scent. Then, turning to its right, it slowly approached, continuing to scent the air until it was within about 25 yards of the tree. Porteus watched with great interest, thinking the elephant would continue into the jungle when, without any warning, the massive beast suddenly turned at a right angle and charged straight at the tree. Luckily, Porteus was standing at the time with one hand on a branch and just managed to wrap his arms around it. Otherwise, the force of the tremendous impact that followed would have surely thrown him off the platform, leaving him at the mercy of the enraged animal below. As it was, he struggled to maintain his position, for the elephant, not satisfied with a single attempt, charged again and again. Each blow bent the tree, which, being slender and young, fortunately had the elasticity to withstand the repeated assaults. Had the tree been more rigid or brittle, it would undoubtedly have snapped under the relentless force of the elephant's attacks. Meanwhile, the young officer found himself in an extremely dangerous situation, with emotions that can be better imagined than described. He had no idea how long the elephant would continue its relentless attacks, or how much longer the tree could endure the blows. Glancing down quickly, he realized with dismay that another misfortune had occurred. His rifle had slipped from its position on the platform and become lodged in some branches just below, out of his reach. To retrieve it, he would have to let go of the branch he was clinging to, but he didn't dare, as the elephant, when not actively ramming the tree, was watching him closely. Any slight movement on his part immediately provoked another furious charge. This extraordinary one-sided duel had been raging for about 10 minutes when the elephant, seemingly exhausted from its failed attempts to dislodge the sportsman, or perhaps pausing to devise a new strategy, began to march away slowly. Sensing an opportunity, Porteus released his grip and leaned over the platform to grab his rifle. However, the faint sound he made was enough to alert the cunning beast below, who instantly turned and charged with even greater fury. Fortunately, Porteus managed to regain his position just before the impact, and though he was now encumbered by the rifle, he was able, albeit with great difficulty, to hold on as the tree absorbed the force of the renewed attack. The elephant charged once more, but then suddenly changed tactics. Raising its trunk, it began searching for something to grab onto and spotted the end of the thin rope securing the platform to the branch. In the struggle, the rope had slipped off and was now dangling down. The massive beast promptly seized it with its trunk, and to Porteus's utter horror, he felt himself being slowly pulled toward the ground as the branch bent under the strain. The branch creaked ominously and seemed on the verge of snapping when, by a stroke of luck, the rope suddenly broke. The branch rebounded with such force that it nearly succeeded in dislodging Porteus, something the elephant had been trying to do all along. But fortunately, Porteus was ready. Though badly bruised and shaken, he managed to hold on, narrowly avoiding disaster. Now, his opportunity came. The elephant, momentarily stunned by surprise, stood still, gazing upwards. Porteus, seizing the moment, positioned the muzzle of his rifle between his left arm and the branch and fired at the beast's head. The shot hit, but too high to be fatal. Enraged by the pain, the now doubly furious elephant charged at the tree once more. In its wild rush, it missed the tree entirely, allowing Porteus a chance to fire the second barrel. This shot seemed to have a greater impact, as the elephant, upon being hit, quickened its pace and dashed into the jungle. Quickly reloading, Porteus fired both barrels in rapid succession at the retreating animal, aiming at what he could see through the trees. These final shots apparently convinced the elephant not to return, as the sounds of its heavy footsteps and the crashing of the jungle grew fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely into the distance. Porteus now had a moment to assess his situation and felt deeply thankful for his miraculous escape. However, he was far from safe, both literally and figuratively, still in the woods. When he checked his watch, he saw it was just after 1 o'clock, meaning he could expect no help for another 4 or 5 hours. In the meantime, the elephant could return at any moment. He was well aware of the vengeful nature of these animals, especially the solitary rogues, and if this one came back, further enraged by its wounds, it was unlikely to leave again without making every effort to exact its revenge. It was clear that he needed to be fully prepared for the possibility of the elephant returning. But how could he make his position more secure? He looked around, hoping to spot a sturdier tree that could better withstand the powerful blows he had experienced, but none were within his reach or climbable. The thought of getting down and trying to make his way through the forest briefly crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it as hopelessly impractical. He wasn't sure he could find his way to the village where his elephant was waiting, and there was no other refuge. Worse yet, the rogue might have circled around to the very part of the jungle he would need to pass through. No, there was nothing for it but to stay where he was and endure the long, anxious hours ahead with all the resolve he could muster. He pulled up the remains of the dangling rope that had nearly cost him his life and settled back onto the platform to begin his tense vigil. Sleep was, of course, out of the question. Even if he had felt tired, he dared not succumb to it. If the elephant returned, his only hope was to be fully alert and ready to deliver a fatal shot, or at least cripple the beast before it could charge. But in truth, sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. The night's harrowing events had been far too intense, and the memory of the horrors he had just survived was more than enough to keep him wide awake. Hour after hour dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last, but thankfully, there was no sign of the rogue's return. Finally, the first light of dawn appeared, and soon after, a distant rustling signalled that something was approaching. The heavy tread and the crashing of branches left little doubt as to what it might be. Porteus, grabbing his rifle, sprang to his feet, his first thought being that the rogue elephant had returned. But then the sound of human voices reached his ears, and a moment later, instead of the fierce tusker he had feared, the familiar and gentle face of the old female elephant appeared in the riverbed, the same one from whose back he had scrambled into the tree the night before. Never had the sight of an elephant been more welcome. Porteus hadn't expected rescue so early and was immensely relieved. He was soon on her back, happily heading homeward, congratulating himself on surviving to tell the tale of his midnight adventure with a wild elephant. As they made their way through the jungle, the sounds of the forest gradually came alive in the early morning light. But just as Porteus began to relax, he noticed something strange. The jungle around them was eerily silent. The birds and animals that should have been stirring with the dawn were nowhere to be heard. A deep unease settled over him, and he instinctively gripped his rifle tighter. Suddenly, the old elephant halted, her ears flaring wide, and without warning, she let out a piercing trumpet that echoed through the trees. Before Porteus could react, the dense foliage ahead of them parted, and out of the undergrowth, the rogue elephant emerged, its eyes locked on Porteus with a terrifying, unnatural intelligence. This was no ordinary elephant. Its massive frame was covered in fresh wounds, but it moved with a speed and purpose that was chillingly deliberate. In a horrifying moment of realization, Porteus understood. The rogue had never left. It had been waiting, tracking him all along, and now it was here to finish what it had started. Porteus raised his rifle, but as he did, the old elephant beneath him suddenly bolted in terror, throwing him off balance. He hit the ground hard, the rifle slipping from his grasp as the enraged tusker charged. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the rogue elephant looming over him, a low, guttural sound rumbling from deep within its chest, a sound that was almost human. When they found him hours later, there was no sign of the rogue elephant, but the look of sheer terror frozen on his face and the trampled earth all around told a story that no one could explain. The jungle had reclaimed its own, and the legend of the vengeful rogue would haunt those who heard it for years to come.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this tale, please show your support by liking and subscribing to the Bug-Eyed Tales channel. Your encouragement helps us spin more yarns for your listening pleasure. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.